Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss some of the seismic changes coming to the world as a direct result of Putin's almost certainly now ill-considered escalated aggression in Ukraine, as well as the heroic acts of resistance by the people and government of Ukraine itself. And I'll be discussing the clear change this has had on Germany now, because that is huge, but also how it may impact the UK's perspective. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the world order, it's a fairly interesting little beast. Those who benefit from it obviously want to keep it as it is. Those who benefit from a system always want to maintain that system. So what happens when someone tips it all out of balance? The world doesn't just stand by and go, oh, look at that. It wants to do something. There's urgent action. The world reorders itself. Some of the changes emerging from Putin's full-scale invasion of the whole of Ukraine has tipped the world balance into chaos, because there were governments that thought he would carry on nicking bits piece at a time. You know, it's still abhorrent to me that even this would be allowed, but there's that love of balance of the world order on all sides. But Putin forced their hand. Ukraine, massive country with a large population, much larger than most countries in Europe, and a population that was not just going to roll over. They are fighting and fighting hard. Even their government are on the streets defending the country. You know, I wake up with a sense of dread each day to check the news that the government, you know, that it may eventually fall. Not a political defeat in the sense that we normally use the term, but in battle. But even before that day, if it comes at all, the sight of a major country in Europe frantically defending itself from a full-scale invasion has shaken the tree. Over the past few days, there have been some quite remarkable things happening. China, for a start, which would normally have supported Russia, has gone. They're not exactly condemning Russia, but they're going, we're not sure about this. You know, there's a lot of talk now of Ukraine joining the EU. It wanted to, of course, but now in terms of really accelerated moves. Obviously, it will have to have secured its borders first. In fact, if Putin had just held on to the parts of the Ukraine he already controlled, it wouldn't have been possible for Ukraine to join the EU, not without sacrificing those parts of the country. So, I mean, nothing can be finalised until it is once again wholly free, but moves seem to be accelerating. There's a real push from within the EU to make it happen now. Then one of the most earth-shattering moments, Germany. A power that has understandably been non-militaristic since the end of the Second World War, has sent weapons to Ukraine. This is the first time the country has sent weapons to a battle zone since the 1940s. A quite major change in policy, but it didn't end there. Germany has now announced that its defence spending will never drop below 2% of GDP. It's just whacked it up by 100 billion euros. It's going to step up military operations now, including with NATO. It will now also engage in sanctions and military exports without worrying about the hangover of their now distant past. It prompted an incredibly insightful comment from a trade expert I've been following for Brexit Wisdom. He pointed out that the dumbasses who kept trying to justify Putin's war with analogies about poking the bears if it's all our fault, but they seem to be very quiet about suggesting that Putin has now poked the bear so hard that even Germany has woken up. People in Europe especially will understand just how big a policy shift this is from Germany. Absolutely massive. Due to the dire consequences of their militaristic path, which was no more so than the likes of France, Spain or Britain, by the way, or the Netherlands or any other major power of Europe. But it did have rather worse consequences in the last century. But due to that past, Germany has adopted a much less interventionist attitude towards armed conflict. It was able to do so as well, I suppose, because peace came to the major powers of Europe because of the post-war moves which eventually formed the EU. There are people who hold the view that it's better not to get directly involved in armed conflicts far away, other than diplomatically. And certainly you could argue the cack-handed way that the all-too-eager US and UK have been in such matters can certainly give credibility to that view. But that policy has now been shattered. Europe is once again invaded. Now, I don't know exactly what prompted this exactly from Germany. Maybe I never will for sure, because this isn't just Ukraine that is invaded. Putin has also threatened other European countries, including Finland and Sweden. Sweden is a member of the EU. Remember, fundamentally, tracing its roots right back, the EU is a peace project. It is there to secure peace for its members. That a member of the EU could be threatened with full-scale invasion Now that's a bit of a shift. Putin has threatened to invade the EU effectively. He might have just been making desperate threats, of course. In fact, I'm not sure it's likely that by the time Putin has taken Ukraine in any meaningful sense, that he will even have an army left to go after further conquests. It's already wearing itself out on the resistance facing him in Ukraine. In fact, his military victory is currently genuinely in doubt. His political victory is now completely impossible. No matter what happens now, no matter how much of Ukraine Putin tries to hold on to, surely the West will not allow it to stabilise that way now. It's too late. Putin claimed that he was acting to counter the aggressive expansion of NATO. Absolute cobblers, of course. I may discuss more of that if I decide to waste my time discussing how the Stop the War dickheads are exposing their hypocrisy over this. But the point is that Putin doesn't care about NATO, really. He actually wanted Russia to join it. What he cared about was countries aligning more with Brussels than with Moscow. He knew NATO was no threat to him. But well done, Vladimir, old China. You've now woken Germany up. This industrial powerhouse at the heart of Europe that had previously had a very, very low commitment to militarisation has just massively increased its defence budget and is going to be taking a more active role in NATO affairs now. I'll bet Putin is getting a hearty pat on the back from his generals over that. Smooth move there, buddy. Because never mind what happens in the short term, in the long term, that means a more militarised West now. But then I got to thinking about whether any attitudes will permanently change in the UK. See, on the right of politics mainly, we've had a toxic habit for some time of allowing politicians to bash the EU or Europe in general, particularly France or Germany, as part of their jingoistic Britain is best rhetoric. This ramped up to fever pitch with Brexit, and we now have an actively toxic relation with our closest allies. Despite what some conservative may think, our geopolitical interests will always be aligned with Germany, Italy, France, in a way that will not always be the case with the United States. In fact, before Putin's move, the US was much less interested in Europe and much more so in the Pacific. We saw this with the abandoning of Afghanistan. There's now another alignment of interest, but it will be fleeting. But our interests will always be in line with the major powers of Europe because we are one of them, whether in or out of the EU. Despite what Brexiteers may like, we can't actually put an outboard motor onto the East Coast and shove ourselves across the Atlantic. But bashing our European neighbours is likely to be a riskier affair now. It has been noted that right-wing populists around Europe who were praising Putin have now had to distance themselves from him. They cannot defend his recent actions. Regardless of whether they are personally against them or not, some will be, some won't be, support for Putin in Europe is politically toxic. Not quite so much for the likes of Nigel Farage and his GB News posse. You know, they're still defending Putin. Who's funding them, by the way? Maybe that needs a proper investigation. But they can continue to praise Putin or at least defend him because there's a core in Britain that will not even balk at what Putin is doing right now. I've said before, I think the fundamental difference here is that Britain, pretty much alone in Europe, has not been successfully invaded in living memory. I think it gives us a complacency that is less easily shaken by events in Ukraine. Whereas the rest of Europe, including of course Northern Ireland during the Troubles, takes it more seriously. British history is all about kings and queens who, if you ever met them, would have stank of shit, and also glorifying imperialism. Yes, we may have killed the odd native, for which we're really sorry, but we did give them cricket. Other countries cannot teach their history without a chapter on occupation. You know, there's plenty of countries around Europe and around the world that have had an imperialist past, and maybe they gloss over some of the nastier details, but there's got to be that chapter on occupation. But beyond the core of cretins that support Farage and his twisted ideology, normal people in Britain may be less receptive towards bashing our neighbours now. Because the thing about major conflicts is that they divide people. You take sides. Never mind national neutrality, that can happen, but people will tend to choose a side. One side is right and one side is wrong. It's the nature of conflict. Even a sports game demands that someone must be supported and another opposed. So how much more an invasion? I don't think many people in Britain are really supporting Putin over this one. We know some are. We know they are. And we also know that their followers are loud but few in number. Most are standing with Ukraine and Europe, and most will be suspicious of a government that does not do likewise, especially when it is increasingly pointed out that Putin's close circle have been funding the Conservative Party and through their weight behind Brexit. The last thing the Conservatives want is for us to start linking Putin with Brexit. Could be awkward times ahead. Maybe even a national change of heart on a few issues. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.